Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Spicy Ottoman podcast. I am Sultan Omar, joined by my trusty Janissary Tarek.
Merhaba, merhaba.
Marhaba, everybody. We're going to use some notable mentions real quick, which is the Greek and Macedonian conflict that I failed to mention in the previous podcast. As you all know, they've had some pretty bad infighting about the name of Macedonia, and they've struck a deal recently in terms of renaming Macedonia to the Northern Macedonian Republic or something like that. But yeah, I just thought it would be it would behoove us as they are our former vassals, so we have to bring them up as the great Ottoman state. But speaking of the Ottoman state, Tarek has some great news regarding our home nation.
Yes, right today, the 24th of June, we're having the Turkish elections. And, everything's going so far smoothly. Nothing blew up yet, I think. um, we believe that in the near future, since we'll be talking about the near future, we might be making a podcast about Turkey and the results of the elections and the possible consequences that they might imply for the future of the Middle East and, well, of Turkey as well. We keep talking about Saudi Arabia and Iran shaping the region, but Turkey also has quite a big weight there, and Turkey is not so black and white as those other two, so to speak. Turkey is this weird player. Okay, we're secularists, but we're kind of Islamist as well. We're kind of democratic. We're kind of authoritarian. So it's an interesting player. But without further ado, let's dive into the topic today.
Yeah, first of all, you forgot to mention our sponsors.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah, the great Ottoman Empire. Thank you for providing us with the dinars. Do they use dinar? I don't know what they use.
They use lira now or something, right?
Whatever you use. Thank you for providing us with that to fund this great podcast. But yeah, so our topic is going to be, well, Tarek, I think you can explain it best.
Oh boy. So today we'll be talking about the near future. Well, that's a pretty broad topic. We'll be focusing on the most relevant issues that might affect the near future for us globally, but in a sense our daily lives as well. And what can we expect for this next decade? In a way, let's put the threshold here at around 2030. But the future is a box of surprises, so you can expect anything. But let us focus on these topics, and then again, each of them is kind of a universe on their own. So if you want us to expand on them afterwards in another podcast, please just leave a comment. And today we're just gonna be very, very, just gonna rush through these topics. So don't expect too much.
That's the goal of every one of our podcasts. Don't expect too much.
Don't expect too much. I mean, be mediocre,
Yeah, that's our threshold, is mediocre. But yeah, so starting off, I guess we can look at the primary players looking in the future, which is obviously the United States is the primary one that everyone focuses on.
God bless America.
God bless America, land of the free, home of the brave. I changed it, so we're not Ottomans anymore. We're Americans. But so China is the next one. Russia, obviously. Who else would you say, Tarek?
Since we talk so much about the Middle East, of course, we have our three big actors now, which is Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. You have they're like the artists, and the canvas is the Middle East. They have us, which of course we're gonna cover the Middle East in another episode, of course. But so far, I would say that globally, the actors would be China, Russia, and the United States. But of course, you have other actors that are emerging and might also play a huge part in this near future. And I'd say the European Union is one of them. The European Union has always been very, subservient of the will of the United States, especially because of NATO. But now they kind of, let's stick to our own for a while. So I'd say the EU is going to have a much more independent role in this near future, especially towards security. You have any other guesses there, Omar?
Yeah, so touching upon the EU, I think because of the backlash that they've faced because of American foreign policy, they're definitely striving for independence, at least in terms of security. The recent migrant wave has been the cherry on top for them in terms of solidifying their independence from American foreign policy, because America hasn't really had to deal with the brunt of that issue, right? It's been neighboring Middle Eastern countries and Europe that have taken the brunt of this wave. Going back into the broader scope of things, we can kind of estimate how things are going to go based off of what's happening now. Russia's probably going to continue its expansionist policy in trying to reclaim the former glory of the Soviet Union.
Amen. Not amen, right?
Yeah,
they're like
Yeah, sorry, you can't
yeah.
say amen. It's glory to Marx. Yeah, so actually we're also receiving money from the communist the communist
Yes.
lobby. But okay, so anyways, China is going to continue its expansion to the Red Sea, and also their monetary
Red
independence.
Sea.
I'm sorry. Oh yeah, what did the Red Sea?
The Red Sea. I mean, they just rename it to the Red Sea, you know.
What's the name of the South
The
China
South
Sea?
China Sea.
Yeah,
South
yeah.
China.
Like if you
All
couldn't
seas
tell,
shall be red from
yeah,
now on.
yeah, that's the Karl Marx type of thinking. But no, if you haven't guessed, I'm an American, and therefore I get a pass in regard to anything education wise, geography specifically, because we're all functionally retarded. So
They just think, oh, Soviets and Chinks are there. Oh, this is the Red Sea.
yeah, it's the propaganda. I'm sorry, folks. I've been instilled by that. But anyways, so China's going to continue its monetary independence, or its strive for monetary independence. They've recently, if I'm not mistaken, established a new Wall Street, like their own internal Wall Street, that they're using for their planned economy, because China has the foresight to be able to plan these huge economic projects, as opposed to America, which is kind of capped by each presidential term. There's a new direction for the country. Oh, who else? Who else is doing things? Israel's a regional power. I think they're going to be trying to expand their influence, especially to conflict Iran, which in itself is its own regional power.
But then
And
again, we're going into the Middle East now, and we should stick to as global as possible, I think. So
well, yeah. So that was global, and now I think we should cut down to regional powers and what they're trying to do.
oh yeah, boy.
Yeah, it's a tasty subject. Yeah. And,
So,
yeah, go ahead.
just let's talk about Europe a little bit because I was just finished introducing Russia into it, and I must say I disagree with you in one sense that Russia is still hungry for more now. I'd say that Russia kind of bit more than it could chew in many ways. It's they have a lot on their plate right now. They have Ukraine. With Crimea, they're still kind of digesting Ossetia from back in 2008. They have the Syria now, which is a huge main course that they might have to worry about right now. So I don't think Russia is going to be so aggressive, at least for the next decade. Even though they've been quite sassy regarding especially the eastern border of the EU, especially with, the Baltics, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia. But I don't think they're going to go just beyond a few teases here and there.
See, I disagree with you on the merit that we see them expanding into Syria in terms of their sphere of influence because they've had historic ties to Syria and they want access to those ports. And I would tell you that 10 years ago, they would not be attempting what they're attempting now. And the pattern just seems to point in that direction because we saw them attempt this in Georgia, right, which failed ultimately. But they did it in Ukraine successfully. They were successfully annexing Crimea. Now we see it in Syria. They're attempting to spread their sphere of influence, and I just foresee that they're going to continue with this pattern because Putin kind of has that KGB mentality. Well, he was a KGB agent, but he has that Soviet mentality of we need to expand as far as possible. That's always been like Russian policy in terms of their defense. The more land, more coverage, the better. So what I'm saying is that you're wrong and stupid. And no, I'm just
Yeah.
kidding.
Oh yeah.
I'm sorry. As an American, I'm superior in my knowledge to you.
Go back to the Red Sea, man. So we also got to see that we're being sponsored by the Communist Party, so I kind of have to dissuade any suspicions on Russia. So
Yeah, we're getting paid by a lot of
Sponsors
people,
first.
so I just want
yeah, we're being paid by RT.
yeah,
I mean, maybe we can get like a gig there or something. That'd be nice.
yeah. So maybe we should just double down and shill entirely for Russia.
Yeah, we should.
We'd be perfect because I mean you're Syrian, right? I'm American. That's the narrative we're gonna go with, and we both love Russia.
Yeah, but well, I think that's a good point actually for you, Matt, because I don't know, they want to say, oh, look, this American agrees with us, so we should agree too, or something like
Yeah,
that.
so we're gonna do that, and then we're gonna expand it to the conservative market, and then end up on Ben Shapiro, so we can advocate for the greater state of Israel.
Glorious.
Glorious. What were we talking about? Oh yeah. So the future. You wanted to touch upon the EU a little bit more in regards to security.
Oh boy. Now,
boy.
surely security in the EU has been one of the highest priorities, especially with what happened in Syria and for two main reasons. The first being refugees, and that we had plenty of refugees in the past year, especially with what went on in Syria, but also Libya, the destabilization of Afghanistan as well. A lot of refugees end up here. So the EU kind of has this posture that, we're going to be in the forefront of anything that happens from now on, and that we already are in that forefront. So we have to seek a more European-centered security policy. We can't just follow the United States and whatever they want to do, and we end up having to soak the mess. And secondly, terrorism-wise, because the EU was also in the forefront of terrorism, at least in the West. And we don't need to go through all the terrorist attacks, but not anyone is safe anymore.
And so you're living in Sweden currently. Would you say that there's a pretty big demographic shift to the right wing? And is that also something that you see in Europe as a whole?
Absolutely. Especially, I'd say that immigrants have always been the one of the main fathers when it comes to making people switch to the right wing. And indeed, that has been quite a problem here. Even though we are living in relatively prosperous times, just wait until we have a crisis. And that's something I wanted to talk about, by the way, because I think we might have an economic crisis in the near future. I mean, they always happen once every 10, 15 years. Of course, it's never so easy to predict them. But we might see something coming up in the next years. And that's when it's going to be really interesting, because this discontent is what really fuels the right wing right now. So
yeah, and it's funny because right now the immigration problem is kind of the catalyst, but it's slow burning because, like you said, Europe is pretty prosperous as a whole, and when a nation is prosperous, you don't really see this outpouring of reactionism.
They didn't take our jobs and stuff like that.
Yeah,
good old arguments.
So if there was an actual economic crisis in Europe paired with the recent migrant crisis and the catalyst that's provided, I do think that we would see some really like far-right reactionary movements taking place. And it's because it's a combination of things. You need to have enough time to move away from past atrocities, past reactionary movements. And it's been so many years since World War II that I think the youth now they're really primed to take advantage or be taken advantage of by these types of reactionary leaders. I don't know if you agree with me on that assessment, but that's kind of just my prediction. And even looking at America, I mean, Donald Trump was a reactionary leader, right? He was elected because of his populist message and his rhetoric against the status quo. Whether or not he actually is a populist leader now, I would say not. I think he's more of the status quo that he was advocating against, but that's neither here nor there. We're talking about the future right now. But I do think it'll lead to more reactionary leaders in the future from America, which will have reverberations throughout Europe.
Absolutely. I think that I would say the far right, but more conservative anti-immigration movements are clearly on the rise, and that they are clearly going to have the representatives elected. So I don't think we're going to see genocides or purges, but indeed you can see Europe tightening up. Right now, many countries are already tightening up immigration laws. So it would not be a surprise if Europe really starts to become much more selective, or sometimes even racist towards others, towards non-Europeans. So it's gonna be a nice decade. I think we're gonna see a lot of stuff.
Yeah, and I predict that a lot of countries are gonna withdraw themselves from the 1957 treaty regarding asylum, which kind of makes it an international law where if someone makes their way into your country illegally, it doesn't matter if they claim asylum, you have to grant it to them, granted that they meet the requirements or the criteria for being a refugee. I predict that America will be the United States, will be the first to withdraw itself from that, and then it'll reverberate to other far-right European nations.
Here's another interesting topic: how the U.S. withdrew from the UN Human Rights Commission. That's also quite an interesting thing we saw this week.
Yeah, and so that's been a pattern that we've been seeing, obviously, with the Paris Climate Agreement, and now it's moving to the UN, which is unheard of, really, especially for the US being like the de facto leader of the UN to withdraw for something like that. And that was pretty much in regards to conflicts in Gaza, which, again, I think that Israel is going to continue being a benefactor of the US for quite some time in the future. And I don't know, a good topic would be what's going to happen with Palestine, specifically Gaza. I don't know if the status quo is going to remain for 10 years or if they're going to be dissolved into their neighboring countries. It's quite
anybody's guess.
Yeah, but what would you predict though?
Regarding Gaza?
Yeah.
Then again, it's a really complicated issue. But what we see is that Israel is playing quite quite skillfully the international stage. They're making new allies, especially in the region of Saudi Arabia with the Gulf monarchies. I mean, of course, they were kind of in the sheets before, but now they're much more publicly allying themselves. So Israel is playing is playing its cards really well, and well, they have plenty of room to do so. Syria is in shambles. They're not going to face any opposition from them. And the only problem is Iran, which Trump has successfully isolated in many ways. We saw that Netanyahu had his PowerPoint show, and well, it's not very convincing to many, but he convinced the only person he had to, which was Trump. And indeed, you see that Iran is getting more isolated again, especially when it comes to America and its sphere of influence.
Yeah, and Iran in the future, aside like an invasion from the U.S. or some kind of drastic covert operation that sees a coup, I don't think Iran's going to have any major role in Palestine in the near future. What I think is more realistic is that there's going to be either a push in BDS. Are you familiar with BDS?
So it's like the thing where you get tightened up and stuff, like to the bed, and tied up to the bed or something.
A little, yeah, it's a little bit the same. So BDS is like boycott, divestment, and sanctions, which is it's a global movement against Israel. It's very similar to what Tarek is describing, but what we've seen recently in the United States is a lot of anti-BDS laws. So they've made it pretty much illegal to be a part of the BDS movement, which to me is incredible because it just shows the power of the Israeli lobby. And I don't foresee that being weakened, especially with Trump in power. It's probably going to be empowered to pass more legislation, which there is two new laws that are in the works right now for federalizing anti-BDS sentiments. So there's that. And then the other possibility, in my opinion, again, don't get mad at me, is that Gaza is going to be enveloped by Egypt, or it's going to just be totally annexed by Israel. I mean, that's the realistic solution. I don't think that they're going to be granted a total autonomy or a total independence, and I don't think it's even financially feasible that they would be totally independent. So that's just my assumptions.
Wow, that actually makes us move on to some of the next interesting things, which is global conflict. You see any other conflicts spiking up in this century, at least in this next decade?
That's a good question. So the only one I could think of is in Syria, because Russia's trying to reestablish its historical connection to Syria in regards to their ports, because port access to Russia is very important. As you know, they have limited number of ports that they can launch from. So I guess there's two different people that would like to have control over Syria: Israel and the U.S. And that's for two different reasons. One is because of the Russian threat, and the other one is because of the Iranian threat. So the next major conflict that I would see in the future would probably be a full-out like 3-4-way proxy to a much greater extent that we see now in Syria between those factions.
Oh boy, I don't want that.
Does anybody want that? Probably it's good for like Call of Duty developers and
announce the Arab Spring 2.
Yeah.
Which makes sense. But we also have, well, there's like these creative things called like the other continents and stuff, but I don't know if people really cares about them.
Well, so the region that I'm least familiar with would be South America, which is your area of expertise. So, and the Ottoman wings spread very far and wide. So,
yes, the Great Wolf of Turan.
Yeah.
And they have like the arrows and stuff, and they just like shoot an arrow into the air, and then whatever it falls, you have to settle there. And
yeah,
stuff.
Exactly. So, hey, let us know about South American regional politics, since you're the expert.
Oh yeah, fucking expert. I mean, when it comes to conflict, the number one thing is the FARC forces in Colombia. There had been some progresses in trying to at least minimize their acting. There's been some like truces, but it all went to shit last year, especially. So the FARC are back. Not at full scale, but they're back in acting just as much as they were before. And that's a big thing, especially when you consider drugs and how they reverberate in the rest of Latin America in the form of crime and the cartels and all kinds of, sometimes even parallel state organizations, depending on where you are. So,
well, how do you foresee that in the future? Like, how is that going to reverberate through the entire South America?
It's not. It's not going to change, to be honest. Because, well, like it or not, drugs are the main issue here. And if we don't really see a very broad standing, a very broad change of policy regarding drugs, for instance, the end of the war with drugs, or this really 100% 180-degree shift in drug policy, I don't think there's going to be any difference regarding these conflicts in South America. So,
Well, I think it does have a pretty big impact in regards to North America. North America, sorry about that. My Turkish came out. But but yeah, well, because these countries, they're contributing greatly, like you said, to the global drug trade, right? And that's moving straight up to Central America, which causes this influx of people seeking asylum in the U.S., which again, it's a huge problem now that we're seeing people on the border being detained because they want
yeah,
they
all
want
the
entrance
cases
into the
and all that.
U.S. It's only going to continue to grow, especially with the corruption of Mexico and the trend that we're seeing with them. They're not improving in any way politically. The drug war in Mexico with the cartels has just spiked drastically. And again, that's just going to lead to more people seeking asylum in the US. And the problem with that is that they don't meet the necessary criteria for a refugee, which is why we're seeing the issues that we're seeing now with these detention centers, because they come in, they seek asylum, and then they get told, well, you don't qualify as a refugee because the drug war isn't, it's their countries aren't in actual official state of war. They're not minorities of any kind being persecuted. So I mean, that's the main thing that I see being projected from South America. And who else did we not cover yet? The Antarctic. I think they're going to see a resurgence in global global hegemony, because I mean they're just the ice people are going to take over. That's all I can say about
What are
that.
called the Inuits? They're gonna take over.
No, I meant literal people made out of ice. I'm reaching my inner Alex Jones here.
Yetis. Oh yeah, yeah. Of course, the ice people. They have like the ice.
The
What
globalist.
they call the ice armies.
Yeah, the globalist
Yes.
ice people.
Yes.
The Muslim globalist ice people. I'm sorry, I misspoke.
Oh yeah, they have to be Muslim as well.
Yeah.
Also, well, I think the Arctic's a very big topic. We should make like a podcast on its own. But indeed, you already start. We can already see some stuff playing out there, especially between Russia, the European powers in the Arctic, which is like Norway and Denmark. Yeah, they are powers now. So, and of course, the Canada and the United States.
It's not only the Arctic, but it's like it's a pairing. It's the Arctic and space. Those are the two main frontiers that we're going to see
Yeah, the
expansion
final
into.
frontiers.
Which again,
But-
we have treaties on both those areas to not militarize, but we just saw Trump make a space force, which
Yeah,
it's under the Department of Defense. It's going to be a military branch, so we can kind of foresee that those treaties are going to be null and void pretty soon.
But to be honest, I think that's not so much of the near future. Of course, in the next decade, we might see some developments in those areas, in space exploration, and also Arctic trade routes that they're planning on opening, and maybe some also resource exploitation in the Arctic. But that's still the beginning of it. I think only around 2030 something, 2040, we might really see stuff actually taking place there.
And so to conclude this, I think technology is the best way to talk about the future, because automation is obviously a big deal. And the way that technology is developing currently, automation is playing a huge role. Personally, I can't wait for total automation of everything.
Sex robots, that's the only thing that matters.
Yeah, sex robots. No, I really want a Tesla because of its self-driving features. But people are worried about how that's going to play a role in terms of global trade, war. Every facet of life is going to be affected by this, and I foresee that that's going to be taking place in China and the United States as the primary hubs of technological development. In terms of AI, we see that China is investing a lot of money in its technological development. I think Japan and Korea are focusing on different types of technology. The people that are actually focusing on practical application of this technology is the United States and China.
I agree with you, but I believe that the main thing here is automation. That's the key word we might see with all this technology being developed, because we need automation. And well, we could have talked about that earlier on when we were talking about demographic shifts, but indeed. I think automation is going to just start playing quite a huge role here in this next decade. It already has started, because you can't just think of automation as cyborgs taking over cashier jobs at the supermarket. No, it's something much more fluid, and it's something that's going to be very gradual.
Well, what people are worried about is that it's going to end up replacing a huge amount of jobs that are not necessary for human interaction. and that would be such a huge hit to the economy, because we saw a microcosm of this when horses were replaced by automobiles, right? The assumption was that, okay, you're always going to need a horse no matter what, and we saw them just fade away, and people are worried that this is going to happen on a much larger scale to a lot more people, and we don't have really any countermeasures in place to keep up with the pace of technology. In China, we're seeing this focus more so on areas of warfare, not necessarily in areas of like commercial application, because they have a different perspective on the world and what they're trying to achieve. I don't know. It's a really interesting topic to cover because it's expansive.
Oh yeah, boy. But just to wrap up automation, I really wanted to touch upon this. Is that well, it's all about the money in the end, and if we're going to replace people, I see that people are still cheap, especially in a developing world. You still have jobs are not so. There are no real incentives to just replace people with machines because they're so cheap in a way. But especially in countries where labor force is extremely expensive, or Scandinavia, for instance, labor force here is not cheap. So, and you can already see some people being replaced by machines. Either if you go to your fast food joint, to Burger King, and you see those, big panels where you can order like instantly with those. That's already a form of automation. You're already replacing the cashier people, the people that take your order with machine, and that's going to progress. Of course, it's just a small sign, but in a way, in countries where labor force is expensive or is getting more expensive over time, like in Japan, you will start to see automation just becoming widespread for the most basic functions. Because, why would you hire a cashier for your burger joint that costs $2,000-$3,000 a month when you can just buy a super huge screen and people just order from there?
I think you're looking at this from a perspective of low-wage work overall, whereas this can be applied to literally any profession. So if you look at, let's say, a doctor, right? If you create a program that can intercommunicate with other, let's say, hubs, and they exchange information at a rate that no human being could ever retain knowledge, and you pair that with a program or a machine such as the Da Vinci machine. Have you heard of this? It's able to perform microscopic stitching to a degree where no human could ever accomplish. It's like a surgery robot for all intents and purposes. So imagine that you come to this machine, it automatically diagnoses what is wrong with you because it has knowledge from all around the world that it can pull up in a second, and then you get put on this machine that performs the surgery because it's communicating with the other machine that's telling it this is exactly what the person has, this is what needs to be removed, and it just accomplishes it, at a fraction of the price that you would have to hire a doctor. So and then that can be applied to lawyers as well. You have this machine that it takes legal knowledge from all around the world, and it can pull it up in a minute, and it can write legal documents for you. It can do anything. It's not just low wage work, I guess.
I completely agree with you, and I've been talking about low wage work here because we're kind of having this time constraint. We're supposed to talk about this next decade, and I don't think that this full-on extremely qualified automation is really going to take place, at least not in this next decade. It's more like low wage work which will be replaced. That's my take on it. Of course, there might be breakthroughs in AI and whatnot. So, but that's my point. I completely agree with you. But if we're talking about this time frame right now, next decade, I don't think that we're going to have this extremely qualified automation yet.
We're going to try to keep this as short as possible because we have 2 episodes coming up, one about gun control and then one about Iran. Or I'm sorry, not Iran, about Arab nationalism. And
so Iran.
yeah, you're right, Iran. The great Arabian state of Iran. No, so those are going to be about over 45 minutes, so we're going to try to cut this one short. Is there any closing comments that you have, Tarek?
Oh, we're fucked. Basically, yeah. Just guys, just wait for the next crisis. I mean, don't want to be like Alex Jones Apocalypse and stuff like that, like Doom machines and stuff, but there's something coming, guys. So don't just waste your money on fucking cryptocurrency. Try saving some stuff now. And then after that, just buy when everything's low. So
I think that you guys should invest in the Great Ottoman State.
Yeah, buy liras, Turkish liras, everyone.
Yeah, buy Turkish liras and make sure you defend yourselves against the Islamic ice people.
Oh, yeah.
But with that being said, I'd like to thank you all for listening. This is just a general overview of the future and what to expect because we are experts on fortune telling. So take care, everybody, and catch you on the next podcast.
Hey, guys.